Hello and welcome to Art Masters. My name is Mrs. Piper, and today we're going to learn about an artist named John James Audubon. He was born in 1806 in France to a mom and a father who was a naval captain. His father wanted him to join the Navy, but John James did not do well on the entry exam, and so he had to come up with something else. His father thought, I'm going to send you to America and have you run a family farm there. So he sailed across the ocean, landed in the United States, and started to kind of manage this farm. But he was very distracted. He was not that great at managing, and he fell in love with the birds and the plants and everything that was new and different in America. So he didn't do so well managing that farm. And he did meet the girl next door, Lucy Bakewell, and he fell in love and married her. And when his father found out that he was spending more time drawing and writing about birds in the wilderness, he was very frustrated. He sent him to Kentucky to run a store there. And at the time he sent him to Kentucky, that was the frontier, that was wild country. And John James couldn't have been happier. He thought it was wonderful in Kentucky. More unique, different birds he had never seen before, and more things to draw. He ended up not doing so well with the store and had to sell it. And in time, decided that he would become a painter of birds. He was considered an artist, a naturalist, and a bird conservationist. So one of the earliest birds that he drew was the eastern phoebe. He thought it was a fascinating bird. He watched it, drew very detailed drawings. This one is painted with watercolor, chalk, and pastel. And so we call it mixed media. And one thing you'll notice, he shows his birds in their natural surroundings. And so this bird often was on cotton, a cotton plant. He wanted to figure out what their travel patterns were. Did they go someplace for the winter and come back? And so he tied a little wire around the ankle of some of the birds. And in the fall, when they flew away, when they came back in the spring, he was overjoyed. He learned more about these birds. Part of what was hard for him to learn about the birds of America was that there were no books on the American birds. There were only European bird books. And so eventually he thought, maybe I should make a book of birds, or at least keep notes. Actually, some other friends said, you've got a lot of great drawings. Maybe you could make a bird book, and you could go to one of the big cities like Philadelphia or New York City and find a publisher for your books. Learning about this chimney swift, he saw them moving around all the time. It was hard to keep them still enough to draw. He noticed that they kept going either in chimneys or in a hollowed out tree. So he found a hole big enough and made it a little bit bigger, climbed inside the tree, and watched these birds. And doing some math, he figured out there was probably 9,000 birds inside the tree trunk. And so this is his drawing of the chimney swift, and he noticed a little scoopy mouth so he could scoop up flying insects. The snowy owl is one of his birds for the book he eventually made. It's a daytime flying predator. So he didn't want to show, it looks like it's in the nighttime with the dark background, but he made it look kind of cloudy and stormy. You can see a little patch of blue to show you that it's daytime, but he wanted you to be able to see the bird better. And so that's why he used the contrasting background. You can see a lot of details on the snowy owl. He traveled up and down along the Mississippi River. His wife stayed home with the two boys and was a school teacher. She earned money so he could travel and become the painter that he was meant to be. And this yellow-billed cuckoo, you can see a lot of detail here, but if you see at the next slide, a close-up, you can see even more details. You can see the antenna on the butterfly. You can see the little light on his eye and the yellow surround on his eye. You can see that he had lines on the claw here. So he really wanted you to know about the birds with the details that he used in his drawings. Some of his pictures disturbed people. Some people thought this was too realistic, seeing blue jays attack the eggs of another bird. But that's what the birds did. This is what they really were like. This helped keep the population of other birds down. and made it so that there were enough insects for more birds. So this was a helpful thing that the blue jay did, but it maybe was disturbing for some. This was not what they were used to seeing in their artwork about animals. He's showing them in realistic poses, not just in a profile, just sitting still. He showed you where they lived and what they ate. So he did travel to Philadelphia and to New York, and he just couldn't find anyone to publish his books or make a book. So he traveled to Europe after saving money for a year and a half. And in Europe, he wasn't having much more success. They loved it. They loved what he had to share. They loved his stories. And he decided, I'm going to try publishing my own book. And that's what he ended up doing. He decided he was going to make it like a portfolio or a collection of pictures, and people would keep adding pictures to the portfolio as he created them. He sold subscriptions. He sold about 165, which doesn't sound like that much. But when you think of how many pages of birds each one of those 165 people got, he ended up making over 70,000 paintings for his Birds of America book. This picture of a brown thrasher was one of his paintings. He actually saw this snake attacking the nest of the birds. He's made it in this nice, he made it artistic here, diagonal line, this diagonal line, so you focus on the nest here. The birds were making such a squawking noise that they brought other birds there, and they pecked and squawked so much that the snake ended up retreating. And this bird that looked like it almost fainted, he helped scoop up and put back in the nest. This picture of a roseate spoonbill was one of the paintings for Birds of America. So when he decided he was going to publish his own book, he decided, I'm going to make everything fit a 40-inch by 30-inch piece of paper, which is a very large piece of paper. And some of the birds, you could put multiple birds on that page, but some, like the roseate spoonbill, you could only put one nicely, and you even had to bend it and fold it to fit into the picture. You can tell that this bird lives by the water, swampy, eats from the water. He's telling you a lot of things without writing any words. Another bird that was difficult to fit on the page was the great blue heron. This bird is 48 inches tall, taller than the paper itself, and its wingspan is 6 feet wide. So he really folded this bird up to make it fit into that paper. That was part of his challenge in his process here. This painting is actually watercolor. It's a pileated woodpecker. It's not part of the portfolio picture. He's showing you here that the woodpecker eats grapes and grubs, and maybe is kind of, they gather together. Looks like they're having a discussion here. He often did multiple views of the birds. So you could see what male and female looked like and get an idea of the different birds within a group. So this picture is showing you watercolor, what watercolor looks like versus an engraving. So he would usually do a watercolor first to get the idea, create the painting, and then he'd turn it into an engraving. A watercolor, you get one picture. When you do an engraving, you can print as many as your engraving plate will hold out for. Sometimes they get kind of weird after you've printed too many times. So you could make many more if you did the engraving. So that's the process he ended up using for his Birds of America book. He traveled to the northern part of the country, to Canada even. And this Leach's petrel was a water bird. It's in an icy cold climate. You can tell it looks cold in the back. It looks stormy in the seas. It's a seabird. It's got the webbed feet. Okay, so it probably eats fish from the ocean. He's telling you a lot of that information here. The clapper rail is another bird that was in the Birds of America book. And this bird kind of used its body coloring as camouflage. And the way he's painted the beak here, it kind of looks like the grasses in the back. So that's part of the camouflage. Now he would paint male and female birds. He'd paint old and young birds, juvenile versus mature. He would paint birds in different seasons. So you could see that how they adapted their coloring to blend into their surroundings. This picture of a wild turkey was actually the first picture that he did for his portfolio. The wild turkey was a popular bird at the time. Benjamin Franklin wanted this to be our nation's bird. Instead, we ended up with the bald eagle. You can see there's a lot of color in this wild turkey. There's a lot of texture. You can see kind of the lumpy, bumpy neck on the bird here, all the layers of feathers, the colors, the patterns. It's a beautiful looking bird. But people they wanted to have the bald eagle. They thought that looked more majestic. But what's interesting to see with this picture is the next slide is the wild turkey engraving lines. So in the process of making his book, he would make an engraving for each painting. So he had to scratched out the engraving, put ink in it, and printed it 165 times. And then he painted each one with an assistant, everything by hand, painted 165 pictures of the wild turkey, so it looked like this. And he did that for over 400 different birds. So it took him about 11 years to make all of the pages for his Birds of America book. This looks a lot like a coloring book page. The Arctic tern is another seabird that he painted. You could see that this is similar to that Leach's petrel, webbed feet, the beak, forked tail here, a lot of details. It looks three-dimensional, like it's in flight right now, and it is on its way down. It probably spotted something in the ocean that it's going to go grab for dinner. So he had painted, as I said, over 400 different paintings of Birds of America. He didn't make much money on that, if any. He spent it was a lot of money. People didn't always pay. He had to keep finding new people to subscribe to the book. So each time he made a couple of prints, he'd mail it to them and they'd put it in their portfolio. It took a long time. And he did do another version of the Birds of America book with a quicker printing process. And that he did make money with. And he bought land outside of or north of Manhattan in New York City, where he lived until he died at the age of 65. But prior to that, he decided he's going to do some animals or mammals of America and did this picture of wood rats for the Viviparous Mammals book. And so they are mammals that give birth to live babies, like a kitten versus a chicken who gives birth to an egg. So that's the difference there. And so he created this book, and his enthusiasm and storytelling and his sharing of his love of birds made other people love birds. And there has been an Audubon Society that was created in his honor to protect and preserve the habitats of birds. People go bird watching now. It's a hobby. Some people really love it. And he's helped create an awareness of birds that never happened before. And in our next slide, we will see some of the sample projects that you will be working on when you do your own scientific illustration with J.J Audubon. And you will be getting a little picture of a bird, and you will create that using his style. And I hope you have a great time. Thank you.